Hey there, friends, and welcome to episode 254 of Just the Zoo of Us. In this week's episode, I am joined by a special guest science communicator for a review, as in a look back on the 500 million year story of bugs, from trilobites swimming around in Cambrian oceans all the way up to the bees and butterflies and ants of today. It is an era's tour of bugs. We discuss ancient millipedes as long as a horse, whether we would rather fight 2 million ant-sized humans or 1 human-sized ant, the arms races and tiny empires and intertwined symbiotic relationships that have shaped the very planet into the world we know today, and so much more. Of course, it is an extra long episode for a reason. Before we get into it, just as a quick housekeeping note, August's bonus episode went up last week. I had fellow Maximum Fun host Alex Schmidt of Secretly Incredibly Fascinating join me to share his experiences on the game show Jeopardy and play a little bespoke animal-themed quiz game show I like to call Leopardy. It was really, really fun. If you're already a Maximum Fun supporter, you can go check that out in your bonus feed right now. If you haven't signed up yet, but you want to hear that and all of our other monthly bonus episodes, head over to MaximumFun.org/join. Now, Just the Zoo of Us presents The History of Bugs with Lucca's BioHub. Hey there, everybody. This is Ellen Weatherford. I'm here with Just the Zoo of Us, your favorite animal review podcast, where this week we're taking the word review a little bit differently than we normally do. We are looking back at some animals through history, through like deep history, like geological history, which I find to be very fascinating. I'm so excited to get to know about it. This week we have a brand new friend. This is Lucca from Lucca's BioHub. Can you please say hi, Lucca?
Hello. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you. Lucca, what are your pronouns real quick?
So I use they, them pronouns. Can I ask about your pronouns?
Yeah, mine are she, her. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk about the story of these amazing critters that are still here today, forms that they've taken, and the way they've impacted the world around us throughout time. Before we talk about that, I would love to talk about you for just a minute. Could you let our friends listening know, what is your relationship like with the creepy crawlies, the critters among us?
So, I'm neurodivergent. I've always felt isolated, and so I've always had a care for perhaps animals that people naturally shied away from or didn't particularly care about. It started maybe earlier with reptiles and insects. They always came in hand in hand, but animals that people were disgusted by, and I didn't quite understand why, because I thought that they were just as cool and just as fascinating than all of the other animals. And the more time I spent looking at them and learning about them, the deeper my relationship to them grew. And here we are today, where I've come to realize that about 80% of all of the animal life on our planet is arthropods, which are all of the exoskeleton creatures on our planet. They do not have spines. In fact, every day I talk to people about the number of mammals on our planet. I think a lot about Noah's Ark, because in pretty much every single depiction of Noah's Ark, you get the animals standard, like the animals that everybody thinks of when you say the word animal. And those animals are lions, giraffes, hippos. You'll maybe get a bird, and like if you're lucky, they'll draw 2 snakes in there. And that is the animals. And when you say animal, people think cow, people think dog. Creative people might think fish or person. But 80% of all animals are invertebrates. And all of the vertebrates that we think about when we say animal make up only about 10% of all of the animal species we've discovered today. They're like a tiny part of the entire ecosystem. And they've been front and center for very good reasons. They're huge and they're similar to us. We can more easily relate to all of these vertebrates because their eyes are like ours and they breathe like us and they taste like us and they move like us in a lot of ways. And
They have a face we can look at.
exactly. Yeah, we can see and understand them, and it's something that we don't really feel for insects, and because of that, they've been pushed to the wayside along with all of their accomplishments, no matter how incredible they may be. And so, as I've fallen deeper and deeper into that, it started with me caring for various reptiles, and you can only keep so many reptiles as an individual person. They need a lot of space if you want to be taking care of them well. They require a lot of energy and attention. Not that insects do not, but insects require a lot less space. A lot of them can live communally. It's very difficult to find species of snakes that you can keep together, but it's much less difficult to keep species of cockroaches together, which in the wild would live in colonies. And so I am able to maintain, I would say, particularly large and interesting and diverse collection of animals by keeping insects and other invertebrates because I am very easily able to provide them with what I consider to be very, very good care, which is something I could not do for so many, say, dogs or even lizards, which is quite exciting for me.
You've got your very own arc.
I have my very own arc. Something I like to tell people is that I actually care for all animals the same, and that mammals only make up 0.3% of all animal species, and so I only care for them 0.3%. Which is like
They get a fraction of my heart.
exactly, and it's like they're fascinating, but there are so many more animals out there that just because they're small get ignored, even though they do way more impressive things.
As someone who puts content about animals, including insects and other invertebrates out there onto the internet, I think that maybe people who like listen to this podcast or maybe a little bit deeper into like animal appreciation would probably be surprised by how frequently I get questions or confused comments from people saying, "Why are you talking about insects? I thought this was about animals." And like how many people legitimately do not know that insects are in fact animals. And I always want to be like, well, what else would they be? It's not a plant. Like,
Yeah, but I mean,
but I get it. I get it. If it doesn't come up for you often, it's out of sight, out of mind. A lot of people probably don't think about insects that often. I get it. But also, yep, most of them are bugs.
yeah, it's, as I'm sure you can guess, I am incredibly familiar with the question. Um, and yeah, I totally get it. I very much understand why it is not thought of that way. But yes, like you just said, insects are, in fact, most animals, which is a fact that tends to perplex and confuse and displease maybe a lot of people. But I think it's quite wonderful. I think it's quite exciting that there are so many more animals out there that most people don't even know about. And I think it's really exciting. Another reason I think why I got into insects specifically is because I got bored. There's a lot of mammals, and they're all really fascinating, but they amount to about 5,400 species. There are over 6,300 species of just dragonflies. I think there's like close to 7 or 8,000 species of just dung beetles. So like I think that we put them on these scales where it's like, oh, you have birds and you have mammals and you have amphibians and you have insects. But it's like, no, actually, because if we're actually looking at those numbers, you have mammals and you have cockroaches and you have birds and you have dragonflies and you have bats. No, I guess bats obviously fall into the mammal category. I'm actually going to touch on bats in a little bit.
Ooh.
But
Yeah, the diversity is so much more like broad than people think
yeah,
it is.
I mean it's so broad. I bring up cockroaches. Cockroaches have only about 600 less species than mammals. And that's just cockroaches. I know you've done an episode on them. They come in a huge amount of variety, but there's nearly as many species of just cockroaches than mammals. And then if you think about a category like beetles, which are often reduced to just like a kind of bug, there are today about 360,000 species of beetles discovered. They are the most numerous animals, like in terms of diversity, on this planet. And so, yeah, now that like 5,400 mammals doesn't look all that impressive compared to 360,000 species of just beetles. And there are many quotes about that, about if there is a creator, they must have an inordinate fondness for beetles, is a quote that I've heard before.
I think that was Darwin in one of his few moments of lucidity. When he wasn't dunking on barnacles or throwing iguanas.
God, yes, complaining.
Hi there, it's me editing this episode with a quick correction. This is a common misattribution. This quote did not originate with Charles Darwin, but rather with British geneticist J.B.S. Haldane. Sorry for the snub, Mr. Haldane. It was a banger quote. You nailed that one. Back to the episode.
He also, as good or bad as our feelings towards Darwin may be, he does have a fantastic quote, which is, again, I can only loosely paraphrase, but goes something along the lines of, I am like close to dying from not having anybody to talk to about insects.
Oh my God.
Which is
so relatable.
Yeah, it's the entire reason I started Lucca's BioHub. The reason I started posting online about these animals that I cared about is because people in my life could only take so much information, and relationships can be many things, but ideally they shouldn't just be one-way info dumping. And
unless you have a podcast.
Unless you have a podcast. And so, yeah, that urge had to come out somehow. And I think it came out in a way that I'm very excited about today, and the way that it's grown and the way that it's developed, which is like, I've gathered all this knowledge here for myself, but also for you now. And I get to share that with the world, and that has become something that is really exciting for me. So yes, I'm here to talk about bugs through deep time. I'm here to talk about where they come from, what we know about them, how they've shaped our planet, and how they've shaped us, all of which I think are really exciting topics. I do want to give a warning that they're some of the most understudied animals on the planet. Their fossil record and their evolution goes back so far that it's difficult to fully understand exactly what is going on, and we are missing so much information. So the information that I'm sharing today is, to the best of my knowledge and ability, our current understanding of how things are and how they have been. I do just want to communicate that so that any of these dates that I'm going to be giving, research may come and slightly change that, slightly shift dates, things may move around, but these are, as far as we can tell, some of the most accurate to-date dates of our understanding of when some of these different creatures evolved and when some of these different events happened.
The joy of science.
Absolutely. I can't wait till like 2 months from now an article comes out that just disproves every single thing I'm about to say today.
It's like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle when like all you have are like 10 of 500 pieces.
Yes, precisely. And I would say that is even like an understatement of what we're actually working with. One fun fact to point out is that I believe over 99% of species are extinct today. And we, in the fossil record represents like probably close to like 1% of the actual species, if that existed back in time, because like the conditions for something to fossilize are so like incredibly minute that like we lose on so much diversity, especially when what we're studying are very small, skeletonless, delicate creatures.
Easily crushable,
easily decomposable. So little of it is like there's no bones in there. They have exoskeletons, sure, but they're also so old. It's like we're going to start this at the beginning of the Cambrian or partway through the Cambrian. And so fossils from back then are some of the, oldest animal fossils we have. And so we're working at a story that is going to build on itself and become more and more concrete as fossil evidence comes to support a lot more what we are understanding in the science, but it is still a story with many blanks in it.
I love anything Cambrian. The Cambrian, that's weird guy time.
It is absolutely weird guy time. And while there's many opinions on what the first arthropods could have been, arguably the first arthropods we know of with absolute certainty, and nobody's fighting on this, is our friends the trilobites. They were these kind of roly-poly-esque looking creatures, a bunch of little legs. They could, in a lot of cases, roll up into a ball. And those are basically some of the earliest arthropods, some of the earliest armored creatures, which later down the line, their descendants or the creatures that were most closely related to them are all of the insects and arachnids and millipedes that we'll be looking at today.
The blueprint.
Yeah, kind of the original blueprint. Trilobites were oceanic creatures. They lived in the sea. And around 520 million years ago, we are starting to see a lot of different trilobite fossils. These are some of the first trilobite fossils we're finding. So this is like early to mid Cambrian.
Are they little or are they big?
Trilobites range in size, but they're generally pretty little. I'm going to say that they're like, obviously, I'm sure that there are examples that extend outside of this range, but most trilobites were probably under like 3 inches long, like 3 to 4 inches at most. So there's a lot of diversity out there in trilobites, even in those very first fossils that we're discovering. So that means that even 520 million years ago, they've already diversified. They've been around for a while. Their common ancestor is long past, and we have a lot of different species to work with. Trilobites also ended up diversifying to a ridiculous amount. It was really, really impressive to see. A ton of them had like horns, and there's a species that had like a 3-pronged fork that extended from a long horn coming off of the front of it. And some had like stalk eyes or like towers of these faceted eyes that sat on top of their head. And we think that they probably buried themselves in the sand and had just their eyes sticking out above the surface.
That's so cool. They're getting conceptually adventurous.
Very much so. And so some of trilobites' predators, you have Anomalocaris, which is a very beloved creature, the bizarre shrimp.
Pokemon fans would remember Anorith, I think, is
Absolutely.
based on Anomalocaris.
I think so. But trilobites, very cool creatures, incredibly diverse, way more diverse than a lot of people even realize. And kind of the beginning of our story of arthropods.
What humble beginnings.
Yeah, humble and yet great beginnings. They started getting eaten by squid eventually, or like the ancestors of squids. And about 510 to 500 million years ago, before any sort of terrestrial ecosystem existed, we actually experienced our first split concrete in what is going to become our 2 major branches of the arthropod family tree. We have on one side what are called mandibulata, and those are going to give birth to crustaceans, myriapods, which are the centipedes and millipedes, as well as insects, which are going to be the largest branch of the entire arthropod family tree. And the other side is called chelicerata, and chelicerata is where you're going to get your arachnids and your horseshoe crabs. Now, recent research suggests that horseshoe crabs are arachnids. It was thought for a really long time that horseshoe crabs evolved prior to the arachnid family tree because they're aquatic, and the ancestor of all arachnids is terrestrial. So it wouldn't make sense for a horseshoe crab to be an arachnid because it would have meant that it went from being aquatic to terrestrial to being aquatic again.
Not unprecedented. We've seen it happen in Wales.
Not unprecedented. And a really interesting thing, actually, is that so some of the latest genetic research seems to imply that horseshoe crabs, which are, again, we have that other side, chelicerata, you have horseshoe crabs, what are called sea spiders, which I know you've talked about before.
They got a little nod a minute ago.
Yeah. I think the diving bell episode, maybe.
Yeah, because I had to Google to see if sea spiders were actually spiders. They were not.
They were not. But they are in that second group of arthropods, chelicerata. So it's sea spiders, horseshoe crabs, and their extinct relatives, the like giant sea scorpions called the eurypterids, and then your arachnids. So all of your scorpions, spiders, tarantulas, ticks, and mites. Including the little Demodex mites that live inside of your eyelashes.
How comforting. You're never alone.
Never alone. So yes, moving on to now the proper splitting of the families of arthropods. We're entering the Ordovician, which starts about 485 million years ago.
Fish hours.
Yeah.
Real fish hours.
Real fish hours. Anywhere from 480 million years ago to 440 million years ago marks the beginning of the terrestrial ecosystem, the very first plants coming onto land. And for the longest time, it was thought that you had fungus come onto land. They kind of turned the stone to earth or some kind of proto-dirt and at the fringes of lake beds and streams and rivers, plants started coming onto land, and with the help of fungus, potentially started digesting also the earth and the embankments and turning all of that rock to humus, which was more fertile and led to more plants being able to grow in those habitats. But turns out, as all of that was happening, is exactly at that time that insects diverged from crustaceans. And insects all have a terrestrial ancestor, meaning that insects were on land right around the time that the very first plants were actually coming onto land. They were there at the birth of our terrestrial ecosystems as we know them today.
So early. Never been this early.
So early.
You think they were up there like first?
Very much so. We talk so much about how our ancestors were the first things to walk on land, but by the time that our footed fish ancestors with proto-lungs actually took their first steps on land, they were stepping into a pretty formed and complex ecosystem that preceded them by millions of years, to the point that we know from all of the evidence that we have that by the time our ancestors first walked onto land, insects had already been flying for about 10 million years.
So they had already not only perfected walking, but had even graduated to flying.
Literally, they'd made it out not only of the oceanic or aquatic ecosystem and colonized land, they'd made it into an entirely new ecosystem, which no creatures up until that point had ever touched.
We were just barely flopping onto the sand, and insects were like, "Oh, you're new here. Oh, I remember my first day."
Exactly. And it's you're crawling onto land. We're exploring the sky. It's like big whoop.
We already finished that level.
Exactly. And so I do want to communicate that there is no fossil evidence to support this. This is purely genetics. And as far as our research can tell, and it's truly from the best of our understanding, this is when insects evolved. Our first fossils and proper concrete evidence to support this comes from either a millipede or an arachnid, which both are separate fossils, which they come in around the same time, which is to say 430 million years ago, which is about 40 million years before our ancestors took their first steps onto land. So,
is this when the bugs are really, really big, or is that a different time?
Not quite. Ordovician is when the first plants come onto land, first insects evolve from our genetic evidence. And because they all have a terrestrial ancestor, Ordovician is more than likely when the first animals actually stepped onto land. But they're not huge yet. They're still pretty small animals. But the Carboniferous is where we had all of our giant arthropods proper. Prior to that, during the Silurian, maybe even during the Ordovician, there were some pretty large creatures in the oceans, like sea scorpions. Again, the closest relatives of horseshoe crabs that are nowadays extinct. They got really big, up to potentially 2 meters long. There were some pretty big aquatic arthropods, but they didn't become big on land for quite a while later.
I am never going to complain about stuff in the ocean being scary ever again for the rest of my life, because at least I don't live at the same time as giant sea scorpions.
Yeah, and to be fair, I would say they maybe resembled lobsters more than they did scorpions, but
I guess what is a lobster but a sea scorpion?
What is a lobster but a sea scorpion? It's they probably didn't have their venomous stingers, but they certainly had claws, and they were certainly really big.
Excellent.
Oh, yeah. Fun fact, by the time that insects are first appearing on land, our ancestors are jawless fish. We have not yet even evolved the ability to open and close our mouths. We are the simplest of aquatic organisms, and they have segmented legs and bodies and are supporting their weight on land and pioneering a new ecosystem.
They're looking back at us I wonder when these clowns are going to catch up.
Yeah, very much so. So, right about when we hit the Devonian is actually when we see the first trees. Now, these trees were not the same trees that we see today. They were way simpler trees, but it's right around the time that those first trees appear that the evidence of insect flight appears as well.
I like to imagine that the trees and the insects are in a race to see who can be the most up. They're the trees are I gotta get taller, and the bugs are oh no, you don't.
It definitely went hand in hand. I think that there was like flight was a complicated thing. It's much debated as to how it evolved in insects, but what we do know is that insects were the first animals by about 150 million years to evolve flight. And for 150 million years, they were the only animals to have evolved flight.
I bet that was amazing.
Really
To be
was.
the only creature, just like the sky is literally yours.
And what was so incredible about that, besides simply the fact that they were the first creatures to enter an entirely new ecosystem, which they were alone in inhabiting for so long, is that today the most diverse creatures in some of their respective clades are the flying animals. Birds are one of the largest groups of vertebrates today. They're the only dinosaurs to have survived the extinction that wiped out all of the non-avian dinosaurs. Birds managed to pull through and survive one of the largest extinctions on our planet, which wiped out massive creatures that have been around for like hundreds of millions of years. But the flying ones are the only ones who made it today.
I've heard it was the ability to eat seeds after the impact winter.
Absolutely. And that's also how our ancestors survived. They were also like smaller, and there's definitely many, many reasons at hand. Flight was a part of it. It allowed them to like be in different habitats quite easily compared to a lot of different creatures. And it also gave birth to a huge diversity of birds that isn't really found in a lot of the other vertebrate groups. They're not as diverse in a lot of cases as birds are. Birds are a really big group of vertebrates. And then if we look at the only other group to have evolved flight, it is bats. And if you look at all the mammals, as I said earlier, there's about 5,400 species of mammals, and a good third of those are just bats. So again, I think it goes to show just how monumental flight is for diversification of species because the sky is a much less inhabited ecosystem than the ocean or the earth is. And so there is so much room to expand into that being the first flying things on the planet is probably what led insects, specifically insects, more so than arachnids, more so than millipedes, who've been there also just as long. That is what led insects to be probably the most diverse animals on our planet by far, is that before anything else, they were able to fly, and that gave them so many advantages at so many points in their lifetime, and they shaped the world as we know it today.
Do you think that insects were bummed out when other animals figured out how to fly? Do you think they were like, oh man, now it's no fun anymore?
So, absolutely, not because it wasn't fun anymore, but because a lot of animals evolved to fly in order to eat insects.
Specifically countering them.
Specifically, it's like, hey, there's a bunch of food up here that has never evolved to like fly defensively because they've never had anything really be able to reach them. And so this is like, if we can figure out how to do this, an easy food source for us. So like
their guard is down.
yeah, insects were up there in like a heaven. It's like no, none of the walking creatures are gonna reach us up here.
None of those scrubs down on the ground.
We have nothing to worry about. And then things started to fly that weren't them, and that was probably a rude awakening indeed. Actually, this is a perfect time to talk about spiders. So when we think about spiders, we immediately, or at least most people, think about spider webs. They've got these big flat webs, and those webs are meant to catch flying insects. And they evolved specifically to catch flying insects. But those aerial webs the spiders make, they evolved at the earliest about 140 million years ago. Whereas spiders, or at least arachnids, were coming onto land like at the very latest 430 million years ago. So that means that there's like close to 300 million years separating arachnids coming onto land and some of our earlier spider-like ancestors and spiders that actually start making webs like we think
300 million years of the spiders watching the insects fly around like, I'll figure this out someday, shaking all 8 fists angrily at the sky like, once I figure out how to build a web, it's over for you guys.
And boy did they, and it really changed the game for spiders. They diversified a whole lot once they figured out how to do that.
The flying insects were like, I wasn't familiar with your game, I apologize.
Literally, yeah. Yeah, nowadays spiders are more diverse than birds, even. So they've got something going on. They really figured something out. But back when they were first around and first coming into being, and like arachnids split into a bunch of different families that we know of today. Some are more obscure than others. You have like really obscure stuff like Raciniulae. They are arachnids. Fun fact, Raciniulae actually start with less legs than they have as adults, much like millipedes do. They also give birth to a single baby instead of laying a bunch of eggs. And so I think they don't have eyes or have very simple eyes that they hardly use. And they live in leaf litter, usually in damp tropical places. That is a more obscure arachnid, but it's around this time that all of these arachnids split away from each other, anything from these weird Raciniulae to spiders, scorpions, ticks, mites. All of these arachnids that I would say we're way more familiar with. Harvestmen also, which are the like one of the animals we call daddy longlegs.
Daddy's long legs.
Yeah. Spiders initially were terrestrial. They were completely terrestrial. Not that they actually they do fly nowadays sometimes as babies. We might get into that.
A lot of people just turned it off. A lot of people were like, I can't hear about
Yeah.
flying spiders. I can't.
Thankfully, it's just the baby spiders. It's just the baby spiders when they need to disperse so that they don't all end up being in the same place and potentially eating each other or eating out the local population. Anyway, but
If you've seen Charlotte's Web, this isn't new to you. You saw them do it in Charlotte's Web. It's not that big a deal.
exactly. And it's just the babies. They do that to leave, and they're so small that the wind can literally carry them to use their silk like a parachute. There's more to that, but we're not going to get into it. But no, as far as I'm aware, no adult spiders fly.
Yet.
Yeah. Yet. Yeah, exactly. Who knows what the future holds?
They've spent all these hundreds of millions of years looking up at the flying insects, like someday.
So, our earliest spiders are terrestrial. They live in tunnels in the ground, and they do make silk. Silk is like one of the things that is proper to spiders. Maybe the very earliest spiders didn't necessarily make silk, but very quickly, silk and spiders came in hand. But silk initially was used for cocoon making. Actually, the earliest uses of silk we have and some of the earliest like ancestors to all arthropods is to actually deposit sperm packets. Males will make a little silk packet of sperm that they deposit for the female to pick up. And centipedes today, I believe, still do this.
That's so
at least some
cordial.
centipedes.
That's so like polite.
It is.
Like, here you go.
Very
You
polite.
can have this if you want.
Yeah.
A little gift for you.
And so, yeah, I think it's really cute. It's like take it if you want it.
Like, I'll just put this here. I'll just leave this here.
Exactly.
And what happens to it, that's up to you.
A lot of arachnids, a lot of centipedes, a lot of these arthropods have mating rituals beforehand so that the male doesn't go and waste a sperm packet. But even after that mating ritual, if it exists, like it's generally like, hey, are you interested in this happening? And if the dance or ritual or like whatever is going on happens accordingly, then the male will usually deposit this little sperm packet. And even then, if the female doesn't take it, the female doesn't take it. But generally, if they've gone through the previous steps, there's a pretty good chance that it's been communicated that like, yes, this is what is going on, and that packet will be taken up and lead to a bunch of babies. Not like that for all arthropods, and even, in fact, I find that actually the most active users of silk today don't really use their silk for that specific purpose anymore. A lot of them do a way more direct insemination, but a lot of spiders eat their mates if they're not into it, or even if they are into it. I will say it is less than people think. I know that people think of like praying mantises, spiders, they're like, oh, they always try to eat their mates. And some are more prone to it. Certain conditions might make that more likely, but it's definitely not like this is a guaranteed thing to happen or even expected to happen in a lot of cases.
I also feel like for praying mantises, people are like, oh yeah, praying mantises, they like to eat their mate. It's like, okay, they just like to eat each other. That's just the time when they're closest to each other. Like that's just when they're close enough that they can do it. They would do it all the time if they could. It's not mating specific. They just like to fight.
They will just eat each other.
They're just down to clown. Like that's all.
Don't think I'm going to go down this tangent, but there's a lot to be said about why praying mantises eat specifically their mates, and specifically just the head of their mates sometimes at first. I won't get into that, but there's a lot of interesting information. I don't know if you've done a praying mantis episode or if you will do a praying mantis episode.
It was years ago. One of the first couple of episodes.
Then this might be new information actually since then. So male praying mantises can mate without their heads. what they can't really do is stop mating or really do anything else after that. And so I am going on the tangent now, I guess.
Too bad.
Um, Females may eat just the head of their mates at first and then mate with them because then that male is going to give all of his sperm to that mantis and isn't going to go off and make a bunch of competitors for her babies to compete with. And once they're done mating, she's likely then to eat the rest of him for nutrients, just to feed her babies. But it's a pretty good reason to start with just the head, and I think that might be why that like idea has formed that they always eat the head of their mates. They don't always eat the head of their mates, but they do sometimes eat just the head or front part of their mates because insect nervous systems are not like ours. They don't have a brain that controls pretty much everything and then a few nerves running down the body. They've got nodes running down their bodies, and different nodes control different things. And the nodes responsible for controlling the butt end of stuff and the release of sperm and the interactions that are involved for mating are not located in the head.
Command center still operational.
Exactly.
What a like 70s country singer. I'm thinking of like a 1970s female country singer approach to like, you can't cheat on me if I've decapitated you.
Yeah.
Like,
it's like,
you cannot cheat on me when you are dead.
Yeah, very much so. Very much on brand. But also I do want to fight the idea that like praying mantises most of the time don't eat their mates. And some species basically don't do it at all, ever. So it is not like a this is how it's happening always. Spiders. So
I've pulled you so far from the shore.
our earliest spiders or our proto spiders are some of the oldest spiders. They do not use their silk to deposit sperm packets. They use their silk to protect their eggs, and they use their silk to line their burrows. So a lot of spiders live in the ground in little burrows that they dig out, and they use silk to keep that burrow basically from collapsing in on them. It's used as a structural element to their burrow because they don't quite have maybe the strength required to like make all the earth really compact around their burrow. And so silk is an easy way to just strengthen everything, make sure that it's not going to fall on them and they're not going to get buried in their own burrows. Following that, some spiders did become arboreal and started nesting maybe in cavities in trees and stuff like that. And then some spider species started using their silk more in the way of a trap, using they're what we call curtain web spiders, which actually I raise curtain web spiders. But curtain web spiders basically just make a big flat silk mat, and they can feel the vibrations on that silk mat, but it's on the floor. And whenever something crawls on that silk mat, they'll run towards it and they can tell where it's coming from.
I've fought many video game enemies like this.
Yes. And one of my favorite spiders, one of the oldest spiders, they're called Mesothelae is the group, and specifically the genus that is left today still is called Lephistius. Some of the most interesting spiders I've raised, they make a little burrow and they have a cap on top of their burrow, like a lid that opens and closes. And out from that lid, there are silk tripwires. And whenever an insect hits one of those tripwires, they'll just like jump out of their burrow really quickly, grab that bug, and immediately go back inside. And so they don't go out hunting. They don't go out wandering.
They've ordered DoorDash.
Yeah, they just wait for things to come to them. And that is the way that spiders hunted for the longest time because spiders had an incredibly inefficient breathing system. And so some of the older spiders that we have today, like tarantulas and the Lephistius that I mentioned, they have what we call book lungs. And those book lungs, they usually have 4 book lungs, 2 pairs of book lungs, and they're basically gills. They're basically repurposed gills. Again, they evolved from an aquatic ancestor, and they repurposed those gills for breathing air, but there's no active movement of air. They don't have lungs to pull that air in and refresh it. So it's just kind of the air around them hitting their gills. And so that means that they can't really afford, just oxygen-wise, to go out hunting, to be walking around looking for things to catch until much, much later when some spiders evolved a more efficient breathing system. And now we have spiders like huntsman spiders, which are really quick and they can chase after their prey. They don't make webs, they don't make burrows, and they just go out and look for food. Wolf spiders do that. Some wolf spiders make burrows still, but will spend a lot of time hunting. Early spiders couldn't do that. They did not have the endurance for that. They just sat in their little burrows and just waited for stuff to come to them.
It's like the viper of the spider. They're in their viper era.
Yeah, just like sit and wait predators, and it worked so well for them. Also, a lot of those spiders still had armor plating on their abdomen. I know when you think of a spider, you have kind of like the abdomen is like kind of a fleshy, round sac, and it kind of looks like a single thing. Whereas if you look at a scorpion, they've got these segments that go down their back. But the earliest spiders, when they were just splitting off from the rest of arachnids, had these armor plating on their back, and the only spiders alive today which still have those are the Lephistius, which make those tripwires. If you look at one, they have armor plating on their back. It's really cool.
Okay, it came up. Oh, they're kind of cute.
They're really cute. I think they're really cute, at least.
I think they are.
And they're pretty small.
I see what you mean, though, with like the segmented abdomen.
Mm-hmm. Spiders nowadays don't have those segments anymore. They're what we call living fossils, Lephistius, much like that one fish that was rediscovered off the coast of South Africa.
Yeah, coelacanth.
Yeah, coelacanth.
Hey there, we are going to take a quick break to hear from a couple of our friends on the Maximum Fun Network. When we get back, we are continuing our bug history journey, so stay with us.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeremy.
I'm Oscar.
I'm Dimitri.
And we are the Eurovangelists.
We're a weekly podcast spreading the word of the Eurovision Song Contest, the most important music competition in the world.
Maybe you already heard Glenn Weldon of NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour talk up our coverage of this year's contest. But what do we talk about in the off-season?
The rest of Eurovision, duh. There are nearly 7 decades of pop music history to cover.
We've got thousands of amazing songs, inspiring competitors, and so much drama to discuss. And let me tell you, the drama is juicy.
Plus, all the gorillas and bread-baking grandmas that make Eurovision so special.
Check out Eurovangelists, available everywhere you get podcasts, and you could be a Eurovangelist too.
Ooh, I want to be one.
You already are. It's that easy.
Oh, okay, cool.
Most of the plants humans eat are technically grass.
Most of the asphalt we drive on is almost a liquid.
The formula of WD-40 is San Diego's greatest secret.
Zippers were invented by a Swedish immigrant love story.
On the podcast Secretly Incredibly Fascinating, we explore this type of amazing stuff.
Stuff about ordinary topics like cabbage and batteries and socks.
Topics you'd never expect to be the title of the podcast. Secretly Incredibly Fascinating.
Find us by searching for the word secretly in your podcast app.
And at MaximumFun.org.
So, we talked about the early spiders. We talked about flight first evolving. We talked about the first trees. And from those first trees, we started getting what we call the first seed plants. So for the longest time, all plants use spores to reproduce. Spores did not really need to be pollinated or anything. The plant just produced spores, and those spores were dispersed elsewhere, and they'd land in moist humus, and then they'd sprout into new plants.
Not my problem.
Yeah, exactly. But shortly after trees started evolving, we started getting the first plants that actually made seeds, that actually like protected their embryos in a nutrient package that gave something for that sprout to actually use. But those seeds needed to be pollinated. And so a lot of pollination in these early plants, these first seed plants, they're called non-flowering plants. They're what we call gymnosperms. We still have them today. It's pine trees, all the trees that have cones. They evolved about right at the start of the Carboniferous. And this is when we're getting our first like really woody plants. We're getting these big woody trees that are making seeds. And they are mainly wind pollinated at this moment. But these first seed plants, when those trees die out, there's nothing yet on the planet that has learned how to decompose wood.
Oh, no.
And so those plants are taking in carbon from the atmosphere, and that carbon is not being released back into the atmosphere. And that means that oxygen levels start rising, and this is what leads to the period of time that we call the Carboniferous.
Oh, because all the carbon got trapped in the wood.
All the carbon got trapped in the wood, and there was no organisms that were really breaking it down yet. And it's also where a lot of our like modern oil and coal deposits come from, is all that wood that never decomposed became what changed and got trapped underground for millions and millions and millions of years. But during the Carboniferous, you have all these trees growing and taking in carbon from the atmosphere and not letting it back out and not really decomposing. And so with that, oxygen levels rise tremendously. And this is the period of time where we get our giant arthropods. So Interestingly enough, the largest arthropod to have ever been discovered, I believe largest arthropod at all, but for sure largest arthropod on land, this is Arthropleura. Arthropleura is a gigantic millipede. We found many, many fossils, very few complete fossils. We don't quite know what their jaws look like, so we're unsure of what they ate, but we figured that like most millipedes, they were primarily decomposers and they would eat decaying stuff and maybe occasionally supplemented their diet with some smaller organisms. But what we do know is that Arthropleura was a giant millipede. It got up to 2.6 meters long. The largest fossil we ever found might have also been a molt, meaning that whatever came out of it might have gotten even bigger than 2.6 meters long.
Oh.
We actually think that Arthropleura predates the huge increase in oxygen in the atmosphere and might have just gotten so big because of the fact that it started off big enough that nothing could really compete with it.
Built
And it
different.
just had so much food availability and it just started eating a bunch of stuff. And it was in a class of its own.
Skill issue.
Yeah, skill issue. But also, we do know that one of the limiting factors and the size of insects is oxygen availability in the atmosphere. And that is because insects have a pretty inefficient breathing system compared to us. We have lungs that can pull in air and push it back out. And that makes it very efficient to get fresh air constantly exposed to our trachea. But insects, they don't have any movement. There's no movement happening. They're filled with tubes.
Full of tubes. It's all tubes in there.
They're full of tubes. They're full of tubes. And so you can imagine if you have like a glass with nothing in it, just from the air moving around, the air in that glass is going to be replaced with different air enough that like it's not going to, just from having a glass, it's not going to stay stale in there. But if you have a really, really, really long tube that is blocked on one end, even though it is open on one end, the like air at the very end of that tube is not going to be refreshed very often. And because that's the way that insects breathe, beyond a certain size, oxygen just doesn't really reach deep enough inside of them to support a huge body size, which is why during the Carboniferous, we saw this huge increase in insect size because of this increase in oxygen, which meant that more oxygen could get deeper into their respiratory system just passively. That is why we believe most insects got really big during the Carboniferous, but supposedly not Arthropleura. Arthropleura might have had something else going on for it.
I'm giant for a different reason than everybody else.
I'm extra special. During the Carboniferous is when we got a pretty big also explosion in terms of diversity, because believe it or not, despite flowers not being a thing yet, insects started pollinating gymnosperms. They probably started initially just feeding on the sap of those plants, probably even unwillingly, but it started becoming an advantage when instead of letting the wind kind of randomly disperse your pollen and hope that it lands on another plant, if you can attract a bug that like wants what you have to offer and it can just get a little pollen on it, it's going to go and seek out more of that same kind of plant. It is a way more targeted way to get your genetic information to a specific spot.
They're like, we have this little bus that's stopping at all of the other little trees. Like, we need to be taking advantage of this little bus.
They did, and so this is about 300 million years ago, close to 200 million years, a little bit less than 200 million years before we start seeing our first flowering plants. And already our first pollinators are around. And the reason that insects make fantastic pollinators is because they can fly. And so they can reach really far off distances and they can go high up in trees and they can bring very precise packages of pollen from one place to another way more efficiently than the wind ever could.
It's way quicker too. Like you can cover a large amount of space in like a small amount of time.
And you can also expend way less. The trees of the time, the gymnosperms, were able to expend way less energy in creating just a ton of pollen, hoping that the wind picks it up and brings it to hit as many plants as possible. And just like have concentrated pollen that would get picked up and brought to very precise locations by like targeted little flying creatures. So this is when we see our first rochoids, which gave birth to cockroaches, praying mantises, and termites. This is when we saw our first beetles, and this is when we saw our first moths. It's also when we're seeing our first dragonflies, and it's when we're seeing the first what we call true bugs.
Bugs have finally entered the chat.
Yeah. True bugs is the order that contains cicadas, stink bugs, assassin bugs, aphids, and a bunch more things like that. What they all have in common is they have a single piercing, sucking mouth part that is meant to pierce through the flesh of a plant and suck out its sap. You would think mosquitoes might be a true bug, but no, mosquitoes are flies that evolved to do the same thing as true bugs. Because, yeah, most mosquitoes, fun fact, they evolved initially to be exclusively feeding on vegetation. And nowadays, only female mosquitoes during the mating season feed on blood because they need the extra protein to make their eggs.
They're simply using their powers for evil.
Exactly. So during the Carboniferous, trees, they're starting to use pollen instead of just spores, and they're starting to use insects to pollinate each other. And we see this huge explosion in all of these different insects, probably helped by the fact that oxygen was so abundant. And at the time, our ancestors are amphibious. We're seeing just some very simple, small amphibious creatures that are like kind of living near the edges of the water. And we're starting to see maybe the first eggs near the end of the Carboniferous or into the Permian that are actually able to survive on land. So they're just like really coming into their colonization of land.
Sticking their toe out of the water.
Yeah. Whereas arthropods are like the dominant life form during this entire period. And specifically, one very well recognized animal that I love to talk about is Meganeura. Meganeura was what we call a griffin fly. Or maybe a griffith fly?
Griffin fly.
Yeah. And so really closely related to dragonflies. It's in the same order, but dragonflies are considered separate, but by so little. They share a very close common ancestor.
I like the naming convention of being like, it's kind of like a dragonfly, so what if we just make it a griffin fly? I like that. Sticking with the mythological theme.
Yes, very much so. And dragonflies are some of my favorite insects. I have so much to say about them. But what I will say about Meganeura is that it got about 2 feet across. It was the size of a pigeon, basically, or a dove, and it looked pretty much exactly like a dragonfly, even though it technically wasn't one. And this giant griffin fly was basically the largest and most efficient and like ridiculous predator of its time. It's wild to me that we're like, oh, our ancestors were the first to come onto land and they really it changed everything. And the predominant predator at that time was a really big dragonfly.
Like they already had stealth bombers.
Yeah.
Like we've got fighter jets up here. This is a bad time to live on land.
And you are crawling on land. You're not even running yet. You're not even you're just kind of glomping around. So we enter into the Permian. We get our first flies. Flies also probably find their traces actually related to pollination. We get our first wasps. This is when our first fossil evidence of pollinating insects actually does arrive, is right around at the earliest 265 million years ago. Again, highly debated. It's really difficult because we don't have the fossil evidence to support the genetic evidence we have. But let's say around 250 million years ago, right as we're entering the Triassic, which is the period of time where dinosaurs started arriving.
We start really cooking in the vertebrate department.
We're getting concretely our first evidence of pollinating insects in the fossil record, as well as trees with structures that are meant for pollination. But those structures are all part of gymnosperms, which is really interesting because nowadays gymnosperms are pretty much exclusively pollinated by wind. Very, very few gymnosperms are pollinated by bugs today. And there's only about 1,000 species nowadays because they've been wildly outcompeted by what we call the flowering plants or the angiosperms. And flowering plants, part of their success was, again, really, really partnering up with insects. Full blast. We're not there yet. We go through flies. We get our very first wasps right around the time that insects really become pollinators full force. And we get our very first dinosaurs 250 to 200 million years ago. And so we're now in the Triassic, the first of the 3 periods that the dinosaurs existed in. And now we're really getting to some more familiar ranges. And now, for the first time, from the Permian to the Triassic is when vertebrates actually start taking on a more significant role. And they've been around now for a while, since about 390 million years ago, but they're really now starting to pick up, and we're really starting to see ecosystems where they are on top of those ecosystems. They are top of the food chains. they're diversifying. They're becoming bigger than anything has ever been before. And so credit where credit is due.
Late bloomers.
Late
Just
bloomers.
late bloomers.
But we finally start seeing our first dinosaurs. And then right as we move on to our next period, the Jurassic, which was about 200 million years ago, we start seeing our first mantises diverging off of the cockroach lineage. Then a little bit later, start seeing our first ants. And ants are monumental to the shaping of our world today.
Everything changed when the Ant Nation attacked.
Everything changed when the ant nation attacked. So ants, fun fact, are descendants of wasps. If you think of an ant, it's basically a flightless wasp. Some of them still have stingers, and they basically lost their wings and became really eusocial and started living in colonies and doing some pretty cool things. And they are primarily predators at this time. So you have ants. They live in colonies on and under the ground, and they're primarily hunting other terrestrial creatures, eating them. But we've gone through the Triassic, we've gone through the Jurassic, and now we're just entering the Cretaceous. And so over the change of like the Jurassic to the Cretaceous is when we see our first orb-weaving spiders, which finally they come around, the spiders that actually make webs.
They're like, we finally gotcha.
Yeah, spiders are like, finally we can catch those guys that have been just like in the air for so long.
It's like when you finally swat that mosquito that's been flying around for like 10 minutes.
They must have been so proud and so happy. But yes, ants are monumental. Ants are the most numerous animals on the planet, or at least on land, as far as I know. In that, like, individual ants outnumber us people at least 2 million to 1. There are more individual ants than probably any other kind of animal. And so they are monumental. But at this time, that's not the case. When ants first evolved, they're a very small group of like predatory insects that live in small colonies. And that is until in the Cretaceous, one of the last big changes that is going to radically change the look of our planet. Flowering plants appear. Fun fact about flowering plants, they probably initially evolved to be pollinated by beetles. Their kind of bowl or cup-shaped flowers were way more appropriate for like big bumbling beetles to come and like bask in the pollen than a lot of the pollinators at this time, which pollinated the earlier gymnosperms, which had like long skinny mouth parts to like go deep into a crevice to collect pollen and nectar. Much like butterflies would today. And like, again, butterflies were around ever since 300 million years ago, around the time the first beetles evolved. But beetles didn't really become full-time pollinators until flowering plants or the angiosperms came around, and they really catered to beetles. And in fact, some of our older flowering plants today are still pollinated by beetles, and beetles are some of the biggest pollinators after bees and flies. But bees aren't even around yet when these first flowering plants evolved, because they evolved for beetles.
Beetles and flowers, best friends forever.
Beetles and flowers, best friends forever. New 2024 motto.
When you mentioned a minute ago that the ants outnumber humans 200 million to 1, I was thinking about it and I was like, I think I could fight 2 million ants. I feel like if it was like me versus 2 million ants, I feel like I could beat them up.
What if I said that, let's put this in perspective a different way. What if I said if you were to weigh all of the ants on the planet and weigh all of the people on the planet, the ants would weigh, by our most conservative estimates, a little bit more. That means that you'd be fighting
every ant.
About, if not more than your weight in ants.
Would you rather fight 2 million ant-sized humans or 1 human-sized ant?
100% 2 million ant-sized humans. Because there is no way I can take on a human-sized ant. I know that
it's
for
game
a fact.
Over. On pure strength alone.
Yeah, this is what I mean when I say that, like, insects are so much more exciting. Like, not only is there way more of them and there's so much more diversity, but if you look at their individual feats, I know that, like, they're small and so they don't seem impressive, but if you put them proportionally, like, ants can carry 50 times their body weight. That's ridiculous. It's not as ridiculous as some beetles that can carry 1,000 times their body weight, which would be the equivalent of us dragging or pulling, maybe even lifting, like, at least 2 buses, depending on the bus, which is like, that's pretty ridiculous. But then you look at stuff like the tiger beetle, the fastest running insect. It's a very small beetle, and it runs at about 2.6 miles an hour, which, most of us can run 2.6 miles an hour. But if you look at that beetle at human scale, if it was our size and running at the same body lengths per second that it does, it would be running nearly the speed of sound. So, that means that it's like if we were its size, we wouldn't be able to run what felt to us like the speed of sound, but it does. And it runs so fast that it goes blind while it is running because it cannot process the information that it is getting fast enough while it is running. They are predatory beetles. That's the name tiger beetles. And tiger beetles run in a straight line towards their prey, stop, look around to see where it's gone, readjust course, and run in a straight line that way until they eventually make it all the way to their prey.
Nobody tell the power scaling fandom community about bugs.
Yeah,
They're gonna be lost.
If you're going the speed of sound, do you think you'd be able to process the information fast enough? Probably not, is my guess.
No, because all of my skin probably peeled off my body.
True. So yeah, their feats are incredible, especially when we look at them at scale, I think.
Beetles are killing the game.
And there's so many of them. We're really killing the game. But we're talking about ants, and we're talking about ants for a very good reason, because as soon as flowering plants started coming around, the gymnosperms had what we call naked seeds. So it's really just a nutrient package and an embryo, but flowering plants have armored seeds. There's a shell and there's a fruit that's going to grow around that seed.
Big win for me. So glad they did that. That's awesome. Gotta be one of my favorite developments in the plant world.
Big win for all of us because our primate ancestors were in large part fruit eaters. And so if it weren't for flowering plants, we wouldn't have fruit. And if we didn't have fruit, we probably wouldn't be around to talk about all this. And the thing about ants and flowers is that they owe everything to each other. And this makes me emotional to think about because of how much I care about it. But ants and flowers pulled each other out of their respective habitats via the connection of seeds. What I mean by that is that ants were primarily predators for the longest time, and they didn't really explode in diversity until they started interacting with flowering plants. Flowering plants actually started growing little sugar dispensers and specialized parts of their anatomy to attract ants for multiple reasons. Ants were pretty good at defending plants that they cared about, and ants still do that today. There's plants today ccalled ant plants.
Not ant.
Oh, that
it was right there.
That's actually, I can't believe that this is the first time I've ever heard or thought about that.
Maybe PL and then a capital A and T.
It might get confusing though. I guess I understand. Have you heard about plants? It's
Yeah,
no,
I'm aware.
No. Plants.
Plant.
Plants. So these plants, modern. There's a bunch of different species. Ferns have evolved to do this. Some flowering plants have evolved to do this. Some big trees have evolved to do this, and some herbs, and all for different reasons. But some have grown cavities inside of them that are favorable to ants, and ants live inside of these plants. And so I can't think of many organisms that have co-evolved with an organism so deeply that that organism became their home. There are examples of that, but it's such an interesting thing that has happened so many times over between ants and plants. Plants benefit so much from having ants caring for them that they've evolved time and time again to not only attract them, but also house them.
Adapting as a species around another species. That is really cool.
Exactly. And that happens all the time. Again, the way we view species is so separate, it does us a disservice, I think. But there are these really fascinating examples of organisms. I mean, it's a symbiotic relationship and organisms really evolving in tandem to such a degree. I find it very impressive. Ants stopped being complete carnivores. They started eating seeds and plants and nectar and things like that.
They lay down their weapons. They call a truce.
Yeah, and
no.
They did not call a truce. They just took up more ways to... Ants are jacks of all trades. They were the first organisms to develop agriculture long before we ever did. There's ants today, but they evolved millions and millions of years ago that cultivate fungus. You know them as leafcutter ants. And so they carry those leaves. They don't eat those leaves. They masticate them and crush them up and grind them up and then feed them to a fungus that grows off of the crushed up leaves, and then they eat that fungus. So they're growing a crop that they take care of, and that species of fungus lives only in the ants' nests. They can't survive without being cared for by the ants. So there's another example of ants and another organism like forming a symbiotic relationship where they are dependent on each other. Without that fungus, those ants die, and without those ants, that fungus dies. And there's different species of these ants, and they each have their own species of fungus. And there's also bacteria that then attack that species of fungus, and then the ants produce an antibacteria. And so it's like in those ants' nests, you can find not only that species of ant, but it's the only place that you can find that species of fungus, the only place you can find that species of fungus eating bacteria, and the only place that you can find that antifungal remedy. It's like an entire ecosystem.
Specific to the ant lifestyle. They've like engineered their own little ecosystem.
Exactly. And we've done that. We've done that, and we're so proud of having done that. And we so often are like, we really we did a lot of agriculture, and we started raising cattle. And it's like, yeah, that's pretty cool.
We were once again late to the game.
We were once again late to the game. And like ants raise aphids and scale bugs in exchange for what we call honeydew, which is a sugary secretion. Again, lots of animals and plants have evolved relationship with ants in exchange for a little bit of sugar, which is really, really cool. But back to flowering plants. Ants live primarily on and in the ground, and it was not until flowering plants actually gave not only habitats but also food resources off of the ground as they started growing on top of trees that ants were able to spread to different habitats entirely, and they started leaving the ground, and ants started becoming arboreal, much like we saw happening with spiders. And then flowering plants started producing seeds that basically had a little ant attractant attached to it. And ants would eat that part of the seed, but leave the rest of the seed intact, and their nests were oftentimes the perfect conditions to incubate that seed. And via those seeds, ants and plants brought each other into habitats that they could have never lived on in their own. Ants and plants both needed humid environments to thrive or certain conditions, but as soon as ants started being able to depend on plants for those kinds of habitats, plants started being able to depend on ants back. And so that is how both ants and flowering plants started entering arid ecosystems and deserts even, that they would have never been able to go there on their own, but because ants would dig out tunnels and burrows that could collect humidity and not be as warm as the dry top of a desert, and bring those seeds into their nests and then survive because there were plants around to feed them, they were able to just bring each other out. And the reason why our planet is so covered in such a huge variety of flowering plants, and part of the reason why flowering plants outcompeted the gymnosperms, the reason why there's over 30,000 species of flowering plants today and only 1,000 non-flowering plants, and the reason also why there are so many species of ants is also because they were able to enter all of these new ecosystems and habitats that were previously unattainable to them, and they brought green to parts of the planet that it could have never existed on its own. And so our planet is the way it is today because of ants. And the reason we have incredible desert plants and things like that is at least in part because ants brought them there. And ants exist in those habitats because plants help them. And so I find that truly beautiful.
Yeah, because neither one could do it without the other.
Ants were such a small group of tiny little predators. They're just like ground wasps until they became the most abundant, numerous creatures on the planet because they were brought to places that they could have never been, and in doing so brought with them plants. And it's hard to say if one of them brought the other, but they brought each other elsewhere, which is truly fantastic.
The joy of ecological teamwork.
Yes. We're now properly in the Cretaceous, and this is now when the flowering plants are really exploding in numbers, and we are getting our first bees, which bees also evolved from wasps, but they evolved a little bit later than ants, and they evolved right around the time that flowers started being a thing. They became basically, a lot of wasps are pollinators, but bees became specialized for pollination.
Boy, the wasp family it's no skips in the wasp family.
Honestly, people hate wasps, and they're wrong. Wasps never miss. They don't.
It's all bangers.
It's really all bangers. This is also right around the time that we see butterflies evolve. So moths, if you'll remember, moths have been around all the way since about 300 million years ago. And now 200 million years later, we're starting to see the first day-flying moths. Fun fact about moths, they have scales on their wings. And those scales do many, many different things. It gives their wings color, and so they could be camouflaged instead of just having clear wings, which might make them quite obvious in certain contexts. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that it might help with the efficiency of their flight. But one of the big things that scales do is that when moths get stuck in a spider's web, those scales can come off and they can fly away. If you've ever held a butterfly, you'll notice the powder coming off of your fingers. Those are all the scales. They come off easily, and the butterfly can, as much as people say otherwise, butterflies can totally fly without the scales on their wings. Maybe not as efficiently, but still fly just fine.
So spiders spend hundreds of millions of years figuring out how to make a web to catch those stupid flying insects, and then they're like, okay, cool, all right, I guess I'll figure out how to immediately get out of it. Great, I'll see you later.
Already some insects had evolved something for an entirely different reason that helped them not get stuck in spider webs. It was like truly...
Spiders, please pick up the pace. Y'all are so late to this.
Well, they actually did very quickly. As soon as spiders have evolved their orb webs, they really diversified. And I don't know if you've ever seen a zigzag spider, or like it's called a yellow garden spider. They have kind of springs built into their webs, and they look like these white zigzags. And basically, those are meant specifically to efficiently catch butterflies and moths, because those scales can come off, but the web contracts. And so as the moth tumbles, it tumbles until it gets to a point where it's just caught, regardless of whether its scales have come off or not.
Wow. That's diabolical.
It really is. But also well-earned, they deserve it.
You worked hard for that.
But right around the time that flowering plants are becoming a thing, bees become some of the first insects to have evolved specifically to pollinate flowers. Beetles have been around a really long time. They were the first flower pollinators, but bees are our first insects to evolve for that purpose, and they weren't around before. Shortly after that is when we actually see butterflies, our first day flying moths. And for a while, we weren't sure when butterflies exactly first evolved. We now know that it was about 100 million years ago. But for a while, we thought that bats actually might have been the driving factor. Bats evolved about 50 million years ago. And so we thought butterflies might have evolved around that time. Turns out butterflies are about twice as old as that, though. And turns out they did not evolve to evade bats. They evolved because of a new food source becoming available, which was the flowering plants, which were rapidly diversifying. And they were like, wow, a whole resource that is there during the daytime, and all these daytime insects are eating them. We should get onto this. And that is when we start seeing our first day flying moths and our proper butterflies. So yeah, this is about when we reached the end of the Cretaceous 66 million years ago.
I'm sure nothing important happened at that point.
Yeah.
Everything was normal and fine.
Everything was normal, and for some inexplicable reason, the dinosaurs are gone. And,
something happened.
Yeah. But insects, very unaffected by this whole event.
Unbothered.
I know we talk a lot about the dinosaurs are wiped out, and then mammals survived and things, but insects and arachnids and the millipedes and all of the arthropods kind of just persisted. The beetles are still there, the butterflies are still there, the bees are still there, the flowering plants are still there. They all kind of just pulled through.
They're looking at the dinosaurs that died off. They're like, skill issue, couldn't be me.
Yeah, it's like insects saw the rise and fall of dinosaurs in its entirety, and they did nothing but diversify more in that time. They were like, wow.
Sucks for y'all. Anyway.
They're still around today, and they're to this day still, despite many other things learning to fly, maybe not that many, but still other organisms learning to fly, and humans and mammals becoming large creatures, and I would say the predominant life form, physically on the planet in terms of the space that we take. Despite all that, the biomass of insects still way outweighs the biomass of vertebrates. And so not only are there more species, there's just more weight of them. Their entire existence outweighs us. And that just isn't spoken of enough. But yeah, this is pretty much the trail up until recent times. Right around the time the dinosaurs go extinct, mammals come around, but insects from then on are not completely unchanged, but have pretty much established themselves as they exist today. And today they continue to exist in these just incredible numbers and this incredible diversity. And they continue to not only be, but prosper and diversify and grow. And I find that really exciting. But in the last 100 or so years, they've experienced a huge drop. In fact, in the last 50 years, they've experienced like drop in numbers, not in diversity, but in their biomass, in some cases up to like 40, 70%. And more people need to care about them, and we need to learn about them if we want to be able to do anything to save them. And so it's not the note I want to leave you on, but I just think it's food for thought. There's a big reason why I care about insects. I think they're tremendously important. They've shaped the way that our planet has existed today. They were the predominant life form for so long, and they get so ignored. And yet they're still here, and they're still so incredible, and they deserve our love and they deserve our attention.
They're like the foundation that like the world is built on. Like,
They are.
like a step up from plants, right? Is like they're kind of the foundation of the animal kingdom on land, at least, which is where we live.
Yeah, and our ancestors, like they came onto land, but our first ancestors weren't, plant eaters. They were predators, and they never could have come onto land if there wasn't an established ecosystem for them to predate on. And like they diversified and they did their own thing, and like all the love in the world to vertebrates. But yeah, I think arthropods do not get the credit that they are due. And so I hope that at least this little bit of story can do that much for them.
What an amazing story, though. And I feel like it helps people to, when you do see a little insect or a little spider or just a little creepy crawly, a little critter around, rather than thinking, oh, gross, let me just brush this away, and be kind of skeeved out by it. Instead, you can think, wow, you are the end result of hundreds and millions of years of life persisting and adapting. And these are like the modern day remnants of the greatest empire, like the great empire of arthropods that like dominated the world. And like, here you are today crawling along my windowsill.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how I feel, and that's how I want everybody to feel. And I don't expect that of everybody, but it's like when I was doing research for this episode, I looked up ants and flowers, and all of the search results were how to get rid of ants from my flowers. Yeah, I couldn't find different search results until I used very scientific language. And I was like, Hymenoptera in relation to angiosperm, and that's just sad. It's sad because our relationship to insects, no matter how fundamental they are, is like rooted in fear and disgust a lot of the time. But they are not only animals just like us, they're so cool and so incredible, and they have such a rich and deep history that like deserves to be celebrated. And I dream of a time when I can look up ants and flowers and not find out how to get rid of ants from my flowers, but how they owe everything to each other.
How we can reunite our flowers with the ants that they yearn for.
How to introduce ants to my flowers so that they do better because their soil is aerated and their seeds get dispersed and they get pollinated. Like, I don't know.
How can I repair my relationship to ants?
Yeah. And I'm a bit of extra information. Roaches are the predominant animal that I raise. I raise a lot of insects, but roaches are the insect I've raised the most of. And roaches are some of the most hated insects on the planet. And yet they are some of my favorites because they are so incredible and they get so much of a bad rep for like so few species. In fact, a fun little statistic, there's about the same percentage of pest cockroaches than there are pest mammals. You have rats and mice and a couple other mammals that you can find inside homes that may lead to infestations and that you don't want, and they'll feed on. But like, when you think of a mammal, you don't just think of a rat. You think of a giraffe and a hippo and a lion and a dog and a person. And yet when you think of a roach, immediately it's the pest, it's the gross, it's the yucky trash garbage, when like 99% of roaches live in fields or jungles and pollinate flowers or eat fruit or like dead leaves. And like, yeah, I think that applies to all of the insects. And like butterflies get a pass because they're pretty. But like,
if they're pretty or if we can profit off of them, then we're like cool with them.
But they're all so cool. And if you can work your way through the disgust and the grossness or the off-puttedness, because I understand that they're bizarre, they're different from us, they look odd, and that can be off-putting, especially because that is an instinct that is trained in us to be off-put by these creatures. But if you can ever find a way to look past that, you will realize just how incredible they are, and that they deserve to be on par with our fastest running mammals. The cheetah, really cool animal. The tiger beetle, just as cool of an animal. And just because it's smaller doesn't mean that it doesn't deserve that praise, I think.
Don't talk about cheetahs and peregrine falcons without also talking about tiger beetles. I think they belong in the same sort of, you should be talking about them in the same sentence.
I certainly think so. We talked about migrations, whereas the largest migration to scale of any animal is in a single run is done by dragonflies. Also, the monarchs have a pretty devastatingly huge migration, especially, again, relative to their body size. They accomplish incredible feats that a lot of the animals that we most praise would be incapable of coming close to even doing.
Couldn't even dream of it.
Couldn't even dream of it. And yet I dream of it all the time because I see it and it's true. And these incredible feats get to be real and I get to celebrate them because I know about them. And maybe you should too.
Aren't we lucky to share the world with bugs?
I truly think that we are.
It's a bug world and we're all just living in it.
Yes, exactly.
And for anybody who now, has the bug and wants to learn more about arthropods and the biodiversity of bugs and wants to learn more from you, where can people go next? Tell people about Lucca's BioHub and all the places they can find you.
So you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all under Lucca's BioHub. It's Lucca with 2 C's and BioHub like biology and hub like pizza hub. Nope, not like Pizza Hub.
Nope.
Nope, not that one.
Pizza Hub.
Pizza Hub. Yeah. No, hub. What's a good hub? Telescope? No, that's a Hubble telescope.
Hubris.
Hubris. The biohubris, which is not entirely inaccurate. But yeah, no, you can find me at Lucca's BioHub both on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. If you want to talk to me directly, you're most likely to reach me on Instagram. But currently on all 3 of the platforms, I am trying to catch every single dragonfly in Illinois. And so if that is something you're interested in, it's not the only stuff I post about, but I am currently on that journey.
Gotta catch them all.
Yeah, gotta catch them all. It's literally what I do and say in the first episode.
You're completing your dragonfly decks.
I am. I've got to. There's about 99 species in my state. There's only about 60 species of mammals in comparison. So yeah, I'm trying to catch them all. I'm really excited about that process. I'm also really excited about everything else that I've been working on, and I've been getting more. I took a small break, and I'm really diving back into making content, which has been really exciting. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you. And I will have links to everything in the episode description so that anybody listening that wants to go hear more can just scroll down and click through. Lucca, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for talking to us and sharing this amazing story. And I hope somebody listening out there is on Team Bug now. Thank you so much. We will talk to you later. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you all so much for listening. I hope that all those tiny feet have made big footprints on your heart. If you liked what you heard today, I hope you leave behind some kind words for us in a review on your podcast app of choice. If you'd like to hang out with us online, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Discord, and TikTok. Links to everything will be in the episode description. You can also send me an email at ellen@justthezooofus.com if you have a cool animal you'd like to hear us talk about on the show. We would also like to thank Maximum Fun for having us on their network alongside their other amazing shows like the ones that you heard promos for here today. You can go check those out and learn more about the network and how you can be a part of supporting our show over at MaximumFun.org. Finally, we would like to thank Louis Zong for our theme music. That's all for today. We'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows.
Supported
directly
by you.